Right after sliding my pen across the final page of our divorce decree, I opened my banking application and canceled the $2 million annual allowance I had been quietly funneling to my mother-in-law for the past 7 years. Exactly 3 minutes later, my phone lit up with a call from my ex-husband Marcus. He was screaming, his voice cracking as he demanded to know why his mother's elite platinum card was suddenly declining at her exclusive country club brunch. I simply smiled, silenced the phone, and stepped into my waiting car. My name is Maya. I am 35 years old and I spent my entire marriage funding a fake billionaire lifestyle for a man who thought he could outsmart me. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled his entire family's empire brick by stolen brick, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind a narcissist exactly who signs their checks. The mahogany conference table at the downtown Atlanta law firm felt cold beneath my fingertips. Across from me sat Marcus, adjusting the cuffs of a custom-tailored Italian suit that my financial technology company had paid for. He was grinning. It was that specific arrogant smirk he always wore when he thought he was the smartest person in the room. Beside him, his overpriced divorce attorney looked equally smug, shuffling stacks of paper that supposedly protected the prestigious family trust. For months, Marcus had dragged me through a vicious legal battle. He fought with everything he had to ensure I would not get a single dime of his family's generational wealth. He paraded his pedigree around the courtroom, constantly reminding the judge, and anyone who would listen, that he came from a long line of black excellence. He loved to paint the picture that I was just a girl from the working-class side of town who got lucky in the tech industry and was trying to secure a bag. Maya, I hope you understand. This is nothing personal, Marcus said, leaning back in his plush leather chair. He folded his hands together, displaying the luxury watch I bought him for our 5th anniversary. But generational wealth belongs to the bloodline. My mother Vivian made it very clear that the family trust must remain intact. You have your little app company, but we have to protect the real legacy. His lawyer chuckled softly, pushing the final settlement agreement toward me. The document explicitly stated that I relinquished all rights to the Vanguard Family Trust, a supposedly massive offshore portfolio that Vivian bragged about at every charity gala and church luncheon in the city. Marcus had spent our entire marriage lecturing me about this trust. He used it as a weapon to make me feel small, to remind me that I married up into his elite social circle. Whenever I complained about paying all the household bills or covering his sister's ridiculous shopping sprees, he would tell me it was just temporary cash flow management until the trust disbursed its annual dividends. You did well for a girl from the projects, Marcus continued, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. You hustled. You built your little tech business. But you have to admit you never really fit in with our crowd. My mother tried to polish you, she really did. But money cannot buy class. I am just glad we could settle this without you trying to claw at the assets my grandfather built. I picked up the heavy silver pen provided by my own attorney. I did not argue. I did not cry. I did not remind him that when we met 7 years ago he was driving a leased sedan and wearing clearance rack suits. I did not mention that his mother Vivian was dodging collection calls from creditors and facing foreclosure before I quietly stepped in and paid off her mortgage. I just looked at him, absorbing the absolute delusion radiating from his pores. Are you sure you want to sign that, Maya? My lawyer asked, playing her part perfectly. We can still contest the trust protections. I let out a soft, amused breath. No need, I said, keeping my voice smooth and perfectly level. Marcus is right. Generational wealth should be protected. I would hate to touch a single penny of his family's legacy. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name with a flourish. Marcus visibly relaxed, a loud exhale of triumph escaping his lips. He actually high-fived his lawyer right there in the conference room. He thought he had won. He thought he had outmaneuvered the woman who built a financial empire from a laptop in a tiny studio apartment. I stood up, smoothing the skirt of my navy blue tailored suit. I picked up my briefcase and looked down at the man I had called my husband for 7 years. Congratulations on protecting your assets, Marcus, I said, giving him a warm, blinding smile. I wish you and Vivian all the best with the family trust. I am sure it will provide for you exactly the way it always has. He puffed out his chest, utterly oblivious to the trap that had just snapped shut around his ankles. You will find your way, Maya. Just keep grinding. I turned on my heel and walked out of the conference room, the heavy oak doors clicking shut behind me. The echo of his arrogant laughter faded as I walked down the marble hallway toward the elevators. He had no idea. He had absolutely no clue that the prestigious family trust he had just fought so hard to protect from me did not actually exist. It was a shell account, a dummy corporation I had set up 5 years ago to funnel my own money to his mother because his fragile male ego could not handle the fact that his wife was the sole breadwinner. I had funded his entire reality. I paid for the country club memberships, the luxury cars, the charity donations that put his name in the local papers. And by signing that document, Marcus had just legally and completely severed himself from the only actual source of wealth in his entire family, me. The afternoon sun hit my face as I stepped out of the glass building, leaving the law firm and my former marriage behind me. My heels clicked against the pavement with the steady, unforgiving rhythm of a woman who had just bought back her freedom. I walked toward my sleek, custom black SUV parked at the curb. Anyone watching from the street level would have seen a titan of industry walking with absolute, unapologetic authority. I slid into the plush leather driver's seat and let the heavy door thud shut, sealing me inside my own quiet sanctuary. The faint smell of expensive leather and air conditioning grounded me. I reached into my designer tote bag and pulled out my iPad. My reflection caught on the dark glass for a fraction of a second before the screen illuminated. I bypassed my overflowing business emails and navigated straight to my secure offshore banking portal. A quick biometric scan, later the financial dashboard loaded. There it was, sitting right at the top of the screen, the Vanguard Family Trust. The grand illusion I had maintained for nearly a decade. I clicked on the account details, watching the automated disbursement schedule load with clinical precision. $2 million a year divided into neat monthly installments, funneled directly into the accounts of my now former mother-in-law, Vivian. Nested right below the cash transfers were the authorized user controls for her unlimited platinum credit cards. For 7 years, I had let this woman look down her nose at me. I had sat silently at her lavish Sunday dinners while she made cutting remarks about my working-class upbringing. I had paid for the very caviar she ate while she proudly announced to her elite friends that her brilliant son had rescued me from poverty. I hovered my finger over the bright red terminate button on the screen. I pressed it down. A green confirmation checkmark flashed brightly. Auto transfer canceled, authorized cards revoked, shell account officially closed. I placed the iPad on the passenger seat and pushed the ignition button. The engine purred to life, but I did not drive away immediately. I leaned back against the headrest and checked the digital clock on my dashboard. I knew Vivian's schedule perfectly. It was Tuesday afternoon. She was currently hosting her weekly high society charity brunch at the Oak Ridge Country Club. She would be sitting at a table surrounded by a dozen women dripping in diamonds, judging the waitstaff and pretending to care about philanthropy. The check for their extravagant meal would be arriving right about now. 1 minute passed. The SUV engine hummed quietly. 2 minutes passed. I adjusted my rearview mirror, allowing a genuine smile to play across my lips. Exactly 3 minutes later, my phone violently vibrated in the cup holder. The caller ID flashed Marcus. I let it ring 3 times before swiping to answer. I put him on speakerphone so his voice could bounce off the pristine interior of the car I paid for. Maya. What did you just do? He shouted. His voice was an octave higher than usual, entirely stripped of that arrogant boardroom baritone he had projected just 10 minutes ago. He was hyperventilating. My mother just called me from the country club in tears. Her card declined. The manager came to her table in front of the entire charity committee and told her the account was frozen. She tried 3 different platinum cards, Maya. 3. They all said insufficient funds or account closed. What kind of stunt are you pulling? Turn the accounts back on right now. I listened to him gasp for air over the phone. I let the silence stretch, ensuring he felt the full suffocating weight of his powerlessness before I spoke. I am not pulling a stunt, Marcus. I replied, my voice as smooth and cold as ice. I am simply abiding by the exact terms of our divorce settlement. You made it very clear in front of your expensive lawyers that the Vanguard Family Trust must be protected at all costs. I relinquished all my rights to it just like you wanted. I am just a working-class girl, remember? I have no business touching your precious generational wealth. Maya, stop playing games with me, he screamed, the panic morphing into raw desperation. The bank told her the main trust account has been completely dissolved. My mother is having a panic attack in the manager's office. You need to fix this immediately. We had a deal. I leaned forward, resting my arm casually on the steering wheel. Did you forget to tell your mother that the family trust she flexes at the country club is actually my money? Your entire Black excellence persona for the last 7 years was bought and paid for by me. Every designer suit in your closet, every luxury car you lease, every single dime that funded your mother's country club memberships and charity galas came directly from the revenue of my financial technology company. You are lying, he stammered, though his voice trembled with the sudden terrifying realization of his new reality. My grandfather started that trust. My family has money. We have always had money. Your grandfather left Vivian a modest house with a leaky roof and $30,000 in debt, I stated, reciting the financial facts I had uncovered years ago. You were drowning in student loans and bad credit when I met you. I created the Vanguard Family Trust. I named it that so your fragile male ego would not shatter into a million pieces every time I paid the mortgage. I routed my business dividends into a shell account and let you pretend you were managing family money so you could feel like a king. But the crown was rented, Marcus, and the lease just expired. But my mother, he whispered, the fight completely draining out of him, leaving only a hollow shell of a man. She does not know. She thinks we are independently wealthy. She is going to be humiliated. She is going to lose her standing on the board. That sounds like a generational wealth problem, I said, brushing a speck of dust off my lapel. You better hurry down to the country club, Marcus. I hear they make you wash dishes in the back if you cannot cover a $2,000 brunch tab. Have a blessed day. I tapped the screen to end the call, cutting off his pathetic pleading. I shifted the car into drive and merged seamlessly into the afternoon traffic, leaving Marcus to face the absolute ruin I had just dropped on his head. My phone vibrated again before I even reached the first intersection. The caller ID flashed Marcus for a second time. I knew he would not let it go that easily. His pride was too fragile to accept defeat on the first round. I tapped the steering wheel to answer the call, routing his voice through the surround sound speakers of my SUV. The city lights of Atlanta began to reflect across the tinted windows of my car. If a camera were mounted to the hood, it would capture the perfect arc shot, tracing the sharp lines of my face as I navigated the bustling traffic. The lens would circle around the windshield, catching the blur of skyscrapers passing by, emphasizing the absolute control I held over this machine and my life. Maya, you listen to me right now, Marcus spat. The panic from 3 minutes ago had morphed into a desperate, venomous rage. You think you can just cut off my family and walk away? You think you can embarrass my mother in front of the Oak Ridge Committee, and I will just let it slide? I will destroy you. I kept my eyes on the road, merging effortlessly into the fast lane. You are welcome to try, Marcus, but you might want to check your bank balance before you declare war. Vengeance is an expensive hobby. I do not need your money to ruin you, he sneered. I have the best legal minds in the city on speed dial. Do you hear me? I am calling the senior partners. I am calling Sterling. He plays golf with me every Sunday. He is a shark, Maya. He will tie your little fintech company up in so much litigation, you will not be able to afford the electricity bill in your office. We are going to audit every single contract you signed during our marriage. We will find a loophole. I will take 50% of your company, and I will leave you with absolutely nothing. I allowed a genuine hollow laugh to escape my lips. The sound echoed through the luxurious cabin of the SUV. He was so incredibly predictable. He honestly believed his country club connections were built on his charm rather than my invisible checkbook. Sterling. I repeated, testing the name on my tongue. You mean Richard Sterling? The senior partner who drives that vintage Porsche you are always drooling over. Exactly, Marcus barked. The very same. He respects my family. He respects the bloodline. He knows you are just a newly rich opportunist who got lucky. He will bury you, Maya. I tapped my manicured fingernails against the leather steering wheel. Which lawyer? Marcus. The one whose wife's experimental hospital bills I quietly paid off last month using my personal black card. Good luck with that. Good luck with... Dead silence fell over the line. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head as his grand illusion began to crack. What are you talking about? He stammered, the venom suddenly draining from his voice. I am talking about reality, I said, shifting my tone to pure ice. Did you really think Sterling plays golf with you every Sunday because he likes your swing? He plays with you because my company manages his firm's largest escrow accounts. When his wife got sick and their insurance refused to cover the out-of-network specialist treatment, I wired the hospital $300,000 directly from my private account. It was a silent gift, a professional courtesy. I own his loyalty, Marcus. I own the loyalty of half the men in your little elite cigar lounge. I signaled and took a sharp turn toward the financial district. You spent 7 years parading around networking events handing out business cards bought with my money. You bought drinks for venture capitalists using a credit card I paid off every month. You built a network of powerful friends who only tolerated your endless bragging because they knew I was the silent bankroll standing behind you. You do not have a legal team. You do not have a network. You do not even have your own country club membership because I canceled that 3 minutes ago too. You are bluffing, he whispered, but he sounded entirely defeated. Call him, I challenged. Call Sterling right now. Tell him you want to sue Maya, the CEO of the fintech firm that keeps his practice afloat. See how fast he hangs up on you. See how quickly your brothers in excellence stop returning your calls when they realize the golden goose has flown the coop. Marcus breathed heavily into the receiver. You are evil, Maya. You set me up. You set my whole family up. I gave you exactly what you asked for, I replied. I gave you the illusion of power. I let you and Vivian pretend you were royalty. I let you look down on my background while my background funded your entire lifestyle. I protected your pride. But today, you decided to sign a legal document proving you wanted to protect your family trust from me. So I removed myself from it. You are on your own now, Marcus. You and your mother can finally rely on your precious bloodline to pay the bills. Maya, please, he started, his voice cracking, breaking down completely. The free trial has expired, I said, cutting him off. Do not call this number again. I ended the call with a swift tap on the screen. The silence that filled the car was the most beautiful sound I had heard in 7 years. I pressed the accelerator, feeling the powerful engine roar to life, pushing the SUV faster down the avenue. The city lights blurred around me, reflecting off the sleek black hood of the car. I had stripped him of his money, his pride, and his fake network in a matter of minutes. But I knew Marcus and I knew his mother Vivian. They were too obsessed with their image to surrender this easily. They would try to retaliate. They would try to save face. And I was completely ready for them. Let them come. Let them try to protect their crumbling empire. I had the matches, and I was more than ready to watch the entire delusion burn to the ground. I pulled my custom SUV into the private underground garage of my downtown penthouse building. The valet tipped his hat immediately as I handed over the keys. I stepped into the private elevator that required a retinal scan to access the top floor. This was my fortress. No generational wealth bought this property. My blood, my sweat, and my sleepless nights did. I walked into the sprawling living room where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. The city glittered below me, completely unaware of the absolute financial destruction I had just initiated. I tossed my keys onto the marble entryway table and walked straight to the kitchen island to pour myself a heavy glass of Cabernet. Before the dark red liquid could even touch my lips, my personal cell phone vibrated violently against the quartz countertop. I glanced at the glowing screen. The caller ID displayed Vivian. I had assigned her a specific ringtone years ago, a sharp, grating classical violin piece that perfectly matched her suffocating pretentiousness. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my wine, letting the complex flavors settle on my tongue. She was undoubtedly calling from her backup phone because her primary platinum line had been suspended due to the frozen accounts. I swiped the screen to accept the call, putting her on speakerphone so I could keep my hands free. Maya, darling. Vivian chimed, her voice dripping with that cloying, artificial sweetness she perfected over decades of country club luncheons. She sounded remarkably composed for a woman who had just suffered a public financial humiliation, but that was Vivian's specialty. She could be standing inside a burning building and still demand someone compliment her designer dress. I was just speaking with Marcus. He mentioned you two had a little disagreement at the lawyer's office today. A silly little misunderstanding regarding the trust accounts. A misunderstanding, I echoed, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. I signed the divorce papers exactly as Marcus requested. I protected your precious family bloodline. I thought you would be absolutely thrilled, Vivian. Listen to me, little girl. Vivian's voice dropped an octave, the sweet facade cracking just enough to let the raw venom seep through. I do not know what kind of financial tantrum you think you are throwing, but you are not going to embarrass me. Not today. Not in front of my committee. The manager here just told me there was a glitch with my cards. A glitch, Maya. You are going to fix this glitch immediately, before the silent auction begins. I swirled the wine in my crystal glass. Vivian was the absolute embodiment of toxic matriarchy. For 7 years, she treated me like a human ATM, exploiting the unspoken rules of the black tax to the absolute maximum. Because I was the one who made it out of the working-class neighborhood, because I built a massive tech company from scratch, I was supposed to carry the financial burden of her entire extended family, without question. But Vivian took it a step further. She did not just demand my money, she demanded my submission. She wanted my funds to sponsor her lavish lifestyle, but she also wanted to maintain the delusion that her family was genetically and socially superior to mine. This family elevated you, Maya. Vivian continued, her tone shifting into a sharp, commanding lecture. When Marcus brought you home, you were rough around the edges. You had ambition, sure, but you had absolutely no class. We gave you our prestigious name. We polished you. We introduced you to the right people, the right circles, the elite society of this city. You owe us a debt of gratitude. You do not get to throw a temper tantrum and cut off the very people who gave you a seat at the table. I actually smiled at that. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of this woman was almost impressive. She genuinely believed her own lies. She believed her decaying family name was worth more than the millions of dollars I had poured into her bank accounts to keep her out of bankruptcy. She completely ignored the fact that her seat at the table was currently being rented by my corporate dividends. The annual charity gala is tonight at the Oak Ridge Country Club, Vivian ordered, not waiting for my response. I am the chairwoman of this event. Half the city's elite will be in attendance. Chloe and Bradley are already on their way. Marcus is joining us shortly. You are going to put on a nice dress, you are going to show up, and you are going to stand by your husband's side and smile. We are going to project a united, powerful family front. You will fix whatever lock you put on my accounts, and you will pay for the VIP tables we sponsored. You will not humiliate me in front of my friends because of your petty divorce drama. Do I make myself clear? I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the streetlights reflecting off the dark pavement. Vivian was terrified. The country club was her entire kingdom. To be exposed as broke in front of her high society friends was a fate worse than death for her. She needed me there to foot the bill and maintain the illusion. She thought she could still bully me into submission using the same old guilt trips about family loyalty and social standing. She thought I was still that eager to please young woman who just wanted her mother-in-law's approval. Tonight, I said softly, letting a chilling calmness wash over my words. The Oak Ridge Country Club Gala. Yes, tonight, Vivian snapped impatiently. Do not be late. And wear the emerald gown I picked out for you last year. It makes you look somewhat presentable. I took another slow sip of my wine. I will be there, Vivian. You can count on it. I would not miss your charity gala for the world. In fact, I am really looking forward to seeing everyone. Good. I am glad you have finally come to your senses. Fix the card issue before you arrive. she demanded before abruptly ending the call. I lowered the phone and let out a soft, dangerous laugh that echoed through the empty penthouse. Vivian wanted a united family front. She wanted me to show up and pay for her grand illusion so she could save face in front of the city's elite. She wanted to remind me of my place in her hierarchy. I walked toward my master bedroom and pushed open the heavy double doors to my walk-in closet. I bypassed the emerald gown she had mentioned, trailing my fingers over rows of custom-tailored designer suits and evening wear. I pulled out a stunning razor-sharp crimson pantsuit. It was bold, powerful, and screamed absolute authority. If Vivian wanted a show, I was going to give her a spectacular one. I was going to walk right into the lion's den, look her elite friends dead in the eye, and burn her entire social standing to the ground. She thought I was coming to save her reputation. She had absolutely no idea I was coming to finalize her eviction from high society. The valet at the Oak Ridge Country Club rushed forward the moment my black SUV pulled into the circular driveway. I stepped out into the humid Atlanta evening air, smoothing the lapels of my tailored crimson pantsuit. The heavy oak doors of the country club swung open, pulled by two attendants in crisp uniforms. The tracking shot of my life would follow me right here, right now. The camera trailing just inches behind my shoulders, capturing the exact moment I crossed the threshold into Vivian's prized sanctuary. The low hum of a jazz quartet and the clinking of crystal champagne flutes spilled into the grand foyer. As I walked down the sweeping marble staircase, the atmosphere shifted. The vibrant crimson of my suit cut through the sea of muted pastels and conservative tuxedos like a blade. Heads began to turn. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. I could feel the weight of 100 wealthy, judgmental eyes tracking my every movement. I kept my posture impossibly straight, my heels striking the polished floor with a steady rhythmic cadence. I was not the working-class girl seeking their validation anymore. I was the apex predator, stepping into a room full of unsuspecting prey. I scanned the glittering ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the silent auction tables and the elaborate floral centerpieces. It did not take long to spot them. Vivian had secured the prime VIP booth right next to the grand stage. Of course she did. I paid for that table 3 months ago. She was holding court surrounded by the city's old money elite. Vivian wore a diamond necklace that Marcus had bought her for Mother's Day using my corporate dividend account. Marcus stood beside her clutching a glass of scotch, trying desperately to project the image of an unbothered titan of industry. To his left stood his sister Chloe, draped in a designer gown she absolutely could not afford on her part-time gallery assistant salary. And right next to Chloe, leaning casually against the high-top table, was Bradley. Chloe's husband was a white man who wore sneakers with custom suits and spoke exclusively in Silicon Valley buzzwords. He loved to brand himself as a tech bro visionary, despite the fact that his startup had never turned a single dollar of profit. I glided across the ballroom floor. The closer I got to their table, the more their forced smiles began to strain. Marcus saw me first. His eyes widened, taking in the crimson suit instead of the emerald gown his mother had demanded. A flicker of pure panic crossed his face before he quickly masked it with a stiff, arrogant grin. He nudged his mother. Vivian turned. Her eyes raked over my outfit, her lips pressing into a thin line of disapproval. But she was a master of public relations. As I stepped up to the VIP table, she threw her arms open, projecting her voice loud enough so the neighboring tables, including the mayor and several prominent judges, could hear every single word. "Maya, darling," Vivian announced, her tone dripping with fake sympathy. "We are so relieved you decided to show up. I was just telling the Hendersons how worried we have been about your little mental health struggles lately. Divorce takes such a terrible toll on the fragile mind." I did not flinch. I did not frown. I simply offered her a razor-sharp smile. The neighboring tables went completely silent, eagerly eavesdropping on the unfolding drama. Vivian was intentionally trying to paint me as the erratic, broke ex-wife who was losing her grip on reality. "It really is a shame," Marcus chimed in, raising his voice to ensure the audience did not miss a beat. He stepped forward, placing a condescending hand on my shoulder. I stepped back immediately, letting his hand drop to his side. Marcus cleared his throat, trying to recover his footing. We know the financial transition has been incredibly hard on you, Maya. Without the family trust backing you up, things must be terrifying. But we want you to know we hold no ill will. We will always support you even when you are lashing out. Chloe giggled softly, sipping her champagne. Honestly, Maya, that suit is a bit loud for a charity gala, do not you think? But I guess when your business is struggling, you have to do whatever you can to cry out for attention. Mom was gracious enough to save you a seat, so you would not have to face the society pages alone. You really should have worn the emerald dress. It hides the stress so much better. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. They were standing there drinking champagne I bought, standing at a table I funded, projecting an illusion of wealth that I had single-handedly created. They were desperately trying to humiliate me into submission, hoping that the public pressure of high society would force me to quietly unlock their credit cards and retreat into the shadows. Then Bradley decided to insert himself into the conversation. He swirled his craft beer and looked down at me with that signature smug expression he always wore when he wanted to explain technology to a black woman who literally owned a financial technology empire. Look! Maya Bradley started using his hands to gesture as if he were giving a TED Talk. Marcus told me about your little liquidity issues today. The frozen accounts, the erratic behavior. It is a classic sign of a failing business model. You scaled too fast without a proper safety net. It happens to amateur founders all the time. You disrupt, you burn cash, and then you crash. You need to pivot. You need to synergize your remaining assets before you face total bankruptcy. I stood perfectly still, letting him finish his ridiculous monologue. The surrounding guests were leaning in, practically holding their breath. Vivian looked incredibly pleased with herself. She thought the coordinated attack was working. She thought I was paralyzed by the public humiliation. You guys are being too hard on her, Marcus said, putting on his best fake compassionate voice. He looked at the surrounding tables, making sure everyone was watching his performance of the gracious, forgiving ex-husband. Maya is just stressed. The market is tough for small startups. We are just glad she is here tonight to clear her head. We even talked about helping her find some investors to keep her lights on. Small startups, I repeated, allowing the words to hang in the silent air. I looked at Vivian, then at Marcus, then at Chloe. Finally, I locked eyes with Bradley. The corners of my mouth curled upward into a cold, calculated smirk. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the distance between myself and the delusional family that thought they had backed me into a corner. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. In a room full of people desperate for gossip, a quiet, confident voice carries further than a scream. I am so glad you brought up business models, Bradley. I said, my tone perfectly conversational but laced with absolute lethal intent. Because I was just reviewing some fascinating financial projections on my drive over here. And I think everyone at this table is going to be very interested in what I found. I opened my designer clutch. The metallic snap echoed sharply. I was not going to cry. I was not going to run away. I was going to stand right here in the center of their precious high society sanctuary and tear their masks off one by one. My fingers closed around the cool metal edge of my phone. I pulled it from the velvet lining of my clutch and let the screen illuminate my face. Before I could even swipe to unlock the device, Bradley chuckled, taking a step closer to me. He adjusted the sleeves of his unstructured designer blazer, playing the role of the benevolent, wealthy savior. Listen, Maya, there is no shame in admitting defeat, Bradley said, his voice carrying that distinct brand of unearned confidence. In the Valley, we call it failing forward. You tried to play in the big leagues, and you got burned. It happens. He looked around the table, ensuring the mayor's wife at the next booth was hanging on to his every word. Chloe and I were talking on the way here. My Web3 platform is currently scaling at an unprecedented rate. We just opened a new seed round, and our runway is massive. I need an executive administrator, someone to manage schedules, handle the low-level logistics, maybe answer the phones and pick up dry cleaning. It is an entry-level role, sure, but it comes with a competitive salary and stock options. It could be a great way for you to transition out of your current financial mess and get back on your feet. A soft landing, if you will. I let out a slow, melodic laugh. It was a genuine sound of pure, unadulterated amusement that echoed sharply over the soft jazz playing in the background. Chloe crossed her arms, glaring at me with deep disgust. Marcus shifted his weight nervously, suddenly looking like he wanted to sink right through the marble floor. Vivian raised her chin, preparing to scold me for laughing at such a generous charitable offer from her brilliant son-in-law. An executive administrator, I repeated, tasting the sheer absurdity of the words. At a Web3 platform that is currently scaling. That is a fascinating pitch, Bradley. But I have to ask, are you scaling before or after the federal auditors look into your catastrophic burn rate? Bradley's smug smirk faltered instantly. What are you talking about? I am talking about the email I received last Thursday from the chief financial officer of my company, I said, my voice projecting clearly and flawlessly across the suddenly silent ballroom. You see, Bradley, when a failing tech startup is desperate for a bailout to avoid total collapse, the founder usually shops their pitch deck around to major fintech conglomerates. They beg for a quiet acquisition just to pay off their mounting debts and avoid prison time. Your lead investor sent your entire portfolio directly to my acquisitions team. I tapped my screen, scrolling through the highly confidential corporate dossier I had saved specifically for this exact moment. My board of directors spent exactly 12 minutes reviewing your company's financials before tossing the entire file into the shredder. We officially declined to acquire your platform for a grand total of $1. A collective gasp rippled through the surrounding tables. Several prominent judges and elite socialites leaned in closer, their champagne glasses frozen in midair. The jazz quartet seemed to play a little softer, as if the musicians themselves wanted to hear the rest of the conversation. $1, I enunciated, perfectly locking eyes with Bradley. The color rapidly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost trapped in a tailored suit. And honestly, my CFO told me we would be overpaying, because your proprietary algorithm does not exist. Your user base is entirely composed of purchased bots from overseas. And your revenue stream is a complete fabrication built on smoke and mirrors. That is proprietary corporate information. Bradley stammered, his voice cracking under the immense pressure of public exposure. He looked frantically at Marcus, then at Chloe, who was suddenly staring at her husband with wide, horrified eyes. You signed a non-disclosure agreement. You cannot discuss this in public. I never signed anything, I corrected him, taking a slow, deliberate step right into his personal space. My legal team threw your non-disclosure agreement in the trash right next to your fraudulent business model. But the absolute best part of the financial report was not the fake users or the non-existent software code. It was the payroll ledger. I turned my gaze slowly toward Vivian. She was gripping the edge of the VIP table so hard her knuckles had turned completely white. The heavy diamond necklace around her throat suddenly looked like a very expensive glittering noose. Vivian, did you know that Bradley pays himself a CEO salary of $400,000 a year? I asked, feigning innocent curiosity. Did you also know that his company generates absolutely zero revenue? So where exactly is that massive payroll coming from? Vivian opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at her son-in-law, her carefully constructed high society mask slipping to reveal pure, unadulterated confusion. I will tell you exactly where it comes from, I continued, not giving any of them a single second to breathe. It comes from you, Vivian. Or rather, it comes from the offshore accounts Marcus has been illegally managing under your name. For the past 2 years, Bradley has been using your retirement funds, your estate equity, and the money I put into your accounts to pay his own inflated salary. He is not a tech visionary. He is a parasite draining your accounts dry to fund a Silicon Valley fantasy that was doomed from day one. That is a lie, Chloe shrieked, slamming her crystal champagne flute onto the table. Bradley just closed a massive funding round. Marcus helped him secure the capital last month. Marcus helped him commit wire fraud. I corrected, my voice ringing out with absolute lethal authority. Marcus took Vivian's liquid assets, leveraged them against a ghost company, and handed the cash directly to your husband so he could play dress-up in the tech sector. And Vivian, you signed off on every single bank transfer because Marcus told you it was a guaranteed investment to protect the family bloodline. Vivian looked like she had just been struck by a commercial freight train. She turned slowly to look at Marcus, her eyes wide with rising terror. Marcus was sweating profusely. His expensive designer cologne was suddenly overpowered by the unmistakable stench of pure panic. He could not make eye contact with his mother. He stared fixedly at the intricate floral pattern on the ballroom carpet, wishing it would swallow him whole. "Is she telling the truth, Marcus?" Vivian asked, her voice trembling violently. She stripped away every ounce of the commanding matriarch persona she had wielded for decades, leaving only a terrified elderly woman. "Tell me this working-class nobody is lying right now. Tell me you did not give my money to Bradley." Marcus swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly against his silk collar. "Mother, it is a very complicated venture capital structure. The market fluctuated unexpectedly. We just need a little time to restructure the assets and regain liquidity." Restructure. I laughed, a sharp, cutting sound that sliced through the heavy, suffocating tension of the room. "There is nothing left to restructure. Bradley took your money, Vivian, and he burned it. He spent it on private jet rentals, bottle service, at elite networking events, and a luxury office space he has not paid rent on in 6 months. And the best part is yet to come. When the whole thing inevitably collapses, and it will collapse very soon, Bradley will just file for corporate bankruptcy and walk away clean. But your name is on the guarantor documents, Vivian. You are on the hook for every single dime of that debt." Bradley tried to speak, but he was literally speechless. His mouth opened and closed silently. The smug, condescending tech bro, who had just offered me a job answering his phones, was now exposed as an absolute fraud in front of the most powerful, wealthy people in Atlanta. The mayor's wife was openly typing on her phone at the next booth, undoubtedly texting the massive scandal to everyone in her high society contact list. Chloe grabbed Bradley's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging deep into his jacket sleeve. "Bradley, tell them she is making this up right now. Show them the bank statements. Prove her wrong." Bradley just stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of intense hatred and absolute soul-crushing defeat. He knew I had the receipts. He knew that if he pushed me even an inch further, I would pull out the actual legal documents and read his entire fraudulent transaction history to the entire country club. "He cannot show you the bank statements, Chloe," I said softly, delivering the final devastating blow. "Because the accounts are officially frozen." The little glitch Vivian experienced this afternoon was not a bank error. It was me cutting off the main supply line. The money is gone, the startup is dead, and your husband is nothing but a con artist wearing a suit paid for by your mother's stolen retirement fund. I watched the devastating reality settle over the table. The grand illusion of the untouchable elite family had been shattered into a million jagged, irreparable pieces. They were exposed, vulnerable, and completely financially bankrupt. And the most beautiful part of the evening was that I had not even dropped the biggest bombshell yet. The air in the grand ballroom grew so incredibly thick it felt like trying to breathe underwater. The absolute silence that followed my revelation was deafening. The polite murmurs of the city elite had vanished completely. Even the delicate clinking of silver forks against fine china at the surrounding tables had ceased. Every single person in the vicinity was locked onto our VIP booth, watching the pristine facade of Vivian's highly curated social empire disintegrate into dust. The jazz quartet on the main stage faltered, a trumpet player missing his cue before the bandleader mercifully signaled them to stop playing altogether. The sudden quiet amplified the heavy, ragged breathing coming from Marcus and Bradley. I kept my eyes locked on Vivian. I watched the terrifying reality wash over her meticulously powdered face. Her eyes darted frantically from her son, who was actively avoiding her gaze, to her son-in-law, who was staring blankly at the floral centerpiece. The devastating truth was sinking in. The boys had not just made a bad investment. They had actively conspired to drain her dry. But Vivian was a creature built entirely on pride and the preservation of her high society image. She could not attack Marcus or Bradley in front of her country club committee. Admitting her own flesh and blood had robbed her would be the ultimate humiliation. She needed a scapegoat. She needed someone to blame for the collapse of her perfect world. And standing right in front of her, wearing a vibrant crimson suit and an unapologetic smirk, was the woman she had always viewed as beneath her. Vivian's perfectly manicured hands began to tremble violently. The heavy diamond necklace resting against her collarbone seemed to choke her as her breathing turned shallow and rapid. She looked past me, making direct eye contact with the mayor's wife, sitting in the adjacent booth. The woman was openly staring, her phone held loosely in her hand, likely having just texted the entire scandal to the country club board of directors. Vivian saw the pity in the woman's eyes. She saw the mocking amusement hiding just beneath the surface of her elite peers. Her entire identity, her status as the untouchable matriarch of Atlanta's old money circle, was being publicly slaughtered. A dangerous feral energy suddenly radiated from Vivian. The aristocratic grace she had practiced for decades completely evaporated, leaving behind nothing but raw, desperate malice. She reached out with a shaking hand and grabbed her crystal champagne flute from the table. Her knuckles turned stark white against the delicate glass. "You disrespectful, ungrateful little nobody!" Vivian hissed, her voice trembling with a venom so toxic it practically burned the air between us. "How dare you come into my sanctuary and spout these ridiculous, vicious lies? You are nothing. We gave you everything. We pulled you out of the dirt, and this is how you repay us. By trying to tear down a legacy you could never possibly understand." I did not flinch. I stood my ground, my posture radiating absolute, unshakable power. "Your legacy is bankrupt, Vivian," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of an executioner's blade. "And I am the one holding the collection notices." That was the breaking point. The undeniable realization of her own powerlessness snapped whatever thin thread of sanity Vivian had left. With a guttural sound of pure, unhinged rage, she swung her arm forward. The crystal flute whipped through the air, splashing freezing cold vintage champagne directly across the front of my tailored crimson blazer. But she did not stop there. Using the forward momentum of her swing, Vivian brought her open palm across my face with everything she had. The sharp, resounding crack of the slap echoed through the cavernous ballroom like a gunshot. The entire venue gasped in unison. A collective wave of shock rolled through the high society crowd. A waiter dropped a silver tray of appetizers, shattering plates against the marble floor. Chloe covered her mouth with both hands, letting out a high-pitched shriek. Marcus stumbled backward, physically distancing himself from his mother, as if she had just detonated a live grenade. Bradley looked absolutely terrified, backing into the heavy velvet drapes behind their table. My head snapped to the side from the sheer force of the impact. My cheek immediately began to burn, a hot, stinging sensation spreading across my skin where her heavy diamond rings had scraped my jawline. Drops of champagne dripped slowly from my chin, landing silently on the pristine white tablecloth below us. Time seemed to stop entirely. The club manager took a tentative step forward from the shadows, his hand reaching for his radio to call security, but he froze, entirely captivated by my reaction. I did not stumble. I did not raise my hand to my cheek. I did not let a single tear form in my eyes. I slowly turned my head back to center, locking my gaze onto Vivian. She was breathing heavily, her chest heaving as she stared at her own hand, realizing the catastrophic magnitude of what she had just done. She had just committed physical assault in a room full of federal judges, corporate attorneys, and prominent politicians. The silence in the room was absolute, waiting for my retaliation. They expected me to scream. They expected me to lunge at her. They expected the working-class girl to finally lose her temper and confirm every terrible stereotype Vivian had ever projected onto me. Instead, I slowly unclasped my designer clutch. My movements were deliberately methodical, projecting a terrifying aura of control. I reached inside and retrieved a pristine white silk handkerchief. I brought the silk to my face and elegantly dabbed the champagne from my chin. I wiped a small drop of liquid from my lapel, checking the fabric with mild disappointment before returning my completely unimpressed gaze to the woman trembling before me. I tucked the handkerchief back into my clutch and snapped it shut. The metallic click sounded incredibly loud in the dead silent ballroom. I took one slow, measured step forward, forcing Vivian to instinctively shrink back against the edge of the VIP table. "You just assaulted your biggest creditor," I stated, my voice ringing out with crystal clear, pristine authority. carrying effortlessly to the furthest corners of the room. Vivian swallowed hard, her eyes darting around the room, seeking an ally and finding absolutely no one. The elite crowd looked at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. "I want you to savor this exact moment, Vivian." I continued leaning in just a fraction of an inch closer so she could see the absolute lack of mercy in my eyes. "I want you to look around this beautiful ballroom. Look at the crystal chandeliers. Look at your wealthy friends judging you. Taste the vintage champagne you just wasted on my suit. Memorize the feeling of wearing those expensive diamonds. Because tomorrow morning my legal team is freezing every single asset attached to your name to recoup the fraudulent loans your son took out using my corporate signature." Marcus let out a strangled gasp, but I ignored him, keeping my eyes pinned solely on the fallen matriarch. "You thought you could put me in my place?" I said, a cold, flawless smile spreading across my face. "But my place is at the top of the food chain. Your place is holding the empty bag your golden child handed you. I will see you in federal court, and I will be taking the house." I stepped back, smoothing the front of my damp blazer with effortless grace. "Enjoy the caviar, Vivian," I said, delivering the final lethal blow. "It is the last party you will ever be able to afford." I did not wait for her response. I did not look at Marcus or the pathetic tech bro cowering in the curtains. I turned on my heel and began the long, victorious walk toward the grand exit. The crowd of wealthy elites literally parted like the Red Sea to let me through. Nobody spoke a word. The only sound in the massive ballroom was the steady, rhythmic click of my heels against the marble floor, marking the exact tempo of Vivian's collapsing empire. I pushed through the heavy oak doors and stepped out into the cool night air, leaving them behind to choke on the ashes of their own burning legacy. The morning sun flooded through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office at FinTech headquarters. It was barely 8 o'clock, but the city of Atlanta was already buzzing with the fallout from the Oak Ridge Country Club gala. My private phone had been ringing continuously since dawn. Socialites, board members, and charity organizers were desperate to confirm the spectacular public execution of Vivian's high society empire. I silenced my notifications, taking a slow sip of my custom-roasted espresso. The bitter warmth grounded me. I stood at the glass, looking out over the skyline, feeling the absolute clarity of a woman who had finally excised a parasite from her life. My executive assistant knocked softly on the heavy glass door before stepping inside. Her face carried a mixture of professional composure and mild concern. She held a thick legal envelope sealed with red tape. "A process server just left this at the front reception desk," she said, setting it carefully on my polished mahogany desk. "He insisted it was highly urgent and required your immediate signature of receipt." I thanked her and waited until the door clicked shut before reaching for my silver letter opener. I sliced through the thick paper and slid the contents onto my desk. The bold, capitalized letters at the top of the first page practically screamed Marcus and his desperate, fragile ego. It was a formal civil lawsuit filed in the Fulton County Superior Court. The plaintiff was my newly minted ex-husband. The defendant was me. But it was not a standard post-divorce grievance about alimony or hurt feelings. Marcus was suing me for embezzling marital assets and breaching fiduciary duties. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair and read through the barrage of ridiculous legal jargon. Marcus had somehow found a bottom-feeding attorney willing to take his case on contingency. His precious country club lawyer Sterling had undoubtedly blocked his number after my public declaration last night. The lawsuit claimed that my entire financial technology empire was built on stolen funds. Marcus was demanding a full 50% equity stake in my company and immediate executive control of my board of directors. It was hilarious. It was genuinely laughable. But then I turned to Exhibit A attached at the very back of the legal packet, and my amusement instantly morphed into cold, calculating fury. It was a photocopy of a contract dated 7 years ago, right around the time I was coding my first proprietary algorithm in my tiny studio apartment. The header read, "Angel Investment and Seed Capital Agreement." According to this fabricated piece of garbage, Marcus had supposedly invested $100,000 of his own personal cash to fund my initial startup costs. At the bottom of the page sat his messy, arrogant signature, right next to a completely forged copy of mine. I stared at the fraudulent ink tracing the jagged lines of my fake signature. Marcus was truly grasping at straws. 7 years ago, he was driving a leased sedan he could not afford and calling me in a panic because his electricity was about to be shut off. He used to borrow my debit card just to buy premium sneakers to keep up appearances with his fraternity brothers. He did not have $100 to his name, let alone 100,000. He had traced my signature. It looked like he had pulled it straight off an old anniversary card or a grocery receipt and slapped it onto a retrodated contract. He was trying to bypass our divorce settlement by claiming he was a primary corporate shareholder from day one. He thought this fake contract would force a judge to freeze my corporate assets and terrify me into offering him a massive cash settlement just to make him go away. He wanted to bleed me dry to save his mother from the total bankruptcy I had just handed her. My private desk phone began to ring. It was a direct, secure line very few people had access to. I picked up the receiver without taking my eyes off the forged document. Maya, you have been served? Marcus said, his voice dripping with that familiar toxic arrogance he always used when he thought he had outsmarted a woman. I told you I would destroy your little company. Did you really think you could humiliate my mother in front of the entire city and walk away with my money? I did not raise my voice. I kept my tone perfectly level, projecting the absolute authority of a CEO dealing with a disgruntled janitor. Your money, Marcus, I asked, tracing the fake signature with the tip of my pen. I am looking at Exhibit A right now. This is a very creative arts and crafts project. Did Bradley help you pick the font? Because this specific typeface was not even released by the software developer until 3 years ago. You retrodated a contract using a font that did not exist when you supposedly signed it. The line went dead silent. The arrogant swagger in his breathing completely vanished. You could almost hear the remaining pieces of his delusion shattering against the harsh concrete of reality. You are lying, he stammered, the panic creeping back into his throat like rising floodwater. My legal team verified everything. We are taking half your company, Maya. The judge is going to freeze your accounts by noon tomorrow. You are going to be begging me for a settlement so you can keep your doors open. You do not have a legal team, Marcus, I said coldly. You have a desperate ambulance chaser who did not bother to run a basic forensic analysis on a document his broke client handed him. Forgery is a serious crime. Filing a fraudulent lawsuit to extort a major corporation is an even bigger crime. You just handed me the exact weapon I need to put you in a federal holding cell. You cannot prove anything, he shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of his own stupidity. You signed that paper. You took my seed money. I made you who you are. You are embarrassing yourself, I replied. I highly suggest you save whatever pocket change you have left for a criminal defense attorney. You are going to need one very soon. I hung up the phone and placed the receiver down with a soft, decisive click. Marcus thought he was playing a high-stakes game of chess, but he was barely managing checkers. He wanted to drag me into a messy public courtroom battle to force a settlement. He wanted to use the legal system to bully me into funding his fake billionaire lifestyle for the rest of my life. But I was not going to play his game. I pressed the intercom button on my desk console to call my lead corporate attorney. I instructed him to completely ignore the civil lawsuit for the time being. I did not want to file an immediate motion to dismiss. I wanted Marcus to feel confident. I wanted him to believe his dirty trick was actually working while I prepared the real execution. Because a forged angel investment contract was just a distraction. A man as desperate and financially reckless as Marcus would never stop at just one crime. He had a taste for luxury he could no longer afford, and people like him always leave a paper trail of dirty money. I just needed to find exactly where the real funds were buried. The sun dipped below the Atlanta skyline, casting long shadows across my office. I dismissed my legal team for the evening and locked the heavy glass doors. When you build a financial technology empire from the ground up, you learn very quickly that data is the ultimate weapon. People can lie. People can forge signatures. But the blockchain, the routing numbers, the digital footprints they leave behind are absolute and unforgiving. Marcus was an arrogant man who loved the aesthetics of wealth, but he fundamentally lacked the intellect required to actually manage it. I knew he had left a trail. I just needed to pull the right thread to watch his entire sweater unravel. I sat down at my custom multi-monitor workstation and cracked my knuckles. Before Marcus moved out, I had my corporate cybersecurity team run a complete sweep of our home network. They mirrored every single device, every cloud backup, and every router log to ensure our company data was secure from his impending exit. I opened the encrypted file containing his mirrored digital footprint. I did not need to search hard. Marcus was sloppy. He operated with the reckless impunity of a man who firmly believed he would never be caught. I clicked into a folder labeled Real Estate Acquisitions that he had hidden inside a directory of golf club receipts. A series of high-resolution PDF documents loaded onto my primary screen. I leaned closer, my eyes scanning the scans of closing documents for a luxury penthouse in Buckhead. The property was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows, custom marble countertops, a private wrap-around terrace. It was the kind of place that cost a small fortune in monthly association fees alone. I scrolled down to the buyer information. The property was not in his name. It was registered to a woman named Jasmine Carter. I ran a quick background check using my corporate database access. Jasmine Carter was a 24-year-old former bottle service waitress who currently worked as a receptionist at one of Marcus's favorite exclusive cigar lounges. I opened the next subfolder and found exactly what I expected. Photographs. Pictures of Marcus and Jasmine posing on the balcony of the new condo. Pictures of them sipping champagne on a rented yacht in Miami. And right there in the middle of the digital stack was a high-definition scan of a recent ultrasound. She was 6 months pregnant. I stared at the black and white ultrasound image of Marcus's unborn child. A lesser woman might have shattered in that moment. A different wife might have thrown her coffee mug against the wall, screamed into the void, and called her girlfriends sobbing about the ultimate betrayal of her marriage. But I felt absolutely nothing. No heartbreak, no devastation, just a cold clinical sense of validation. Marcus had been draining resources to fund a secret second family while simultaneously lecturing me about the sanctity of his elite bloodline. It was poetic in its sheer pathetic hypocrisy. But as I continued to review the closing documents for the Buckhead condo, my analytical mind caught a glaring, blazing inconsistency. The heartbreak of infidelity was entirely irrelevant to me. The math, however, was screaming for my attention. The purchase price of the condo was $2.4 million. I scanned the settlement statement. It was a cash transaction. Paid in full, no mortgage, no financing, just a clean direct wire transfer to the title company. I sat back in my chair, tapping my manicured nails against the smooth mahogany desk. The math was simply not mathing. I knew exactly how much money Marcus had. He had nothing. I had systematically locked down every single joint account, every corporate credit card, and every investment portfolio attached to my name weeks before I handed him the divorce papers. The $2 million annual allowance I had been funneling to Vivian was strictly monitored and completely inaccessible to him for lump sum withdrawals. His fraudulent civil lawsuit demanding half of my company was a desperate, transparent cash grab because he was completely broke. So how does a broke man suddenly manifest $2.4 million in liquid cash to buy a luxury condo for his pregnant mistress? He did not get it from me. He certainly did not get it from his mother Vivian, whose credit cards were currently bouncing at the country club. And he did not earn it. I leaned forward, my eyes narrowing as I zoomed in on the wire transfer receipt attached to the closing documents. I highlighted the routing number and the originating bank details. The money did not come from a domestic account. It originated from a massive offshore holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. A cold thrill of adrenaline spiked through my veins. This was not just a case of a cheating husband hiding a few $1,000s in a secret checking account. This was high-level financial obfuscation. An offshore wire transfer of that magnitude required corporate facilitation. It required a network of shell accounts and a deliberate intent to hide the origin of the funds. Marcus was arrogant, but he was not a financial mastermind. He did not possess the technical knowledge or the international connections to set up a Cayman Islands holding company on his own. Someone had to help him. Someone with experience in moving dirty money and creating fake corporate entities. My mind immediately flashed to the gala, to the smug, condescending face of his white brother-in-law, Bradley. Bradley, the self-proclaimed Silicon Valley visionary, whose entire Web3 startup was built on fraudulent user data and fabricated revenue streams. Bradley needed massive amounts of cash to keep his dying company afloat, and Marcus needed massive amounts of untraceable cash to fund his secret double life. I pulled up the corporate registry database and ran a trace on the offshore holding company that had wired the money for the condo. The layers of corporate protection were thick, but my software was designed to penetrate the deepest financial labyrinths. I stripped away the dummy directors and the proxy addresses until I hit the foundational bedrock of the account. The offshore holding company was officially registered to a parent corporation. The parent corporation's name glowed brightly on my monitor. It was the exact same parent corporation that owned Bradley's failing Web3 startup. I let out a slow, sharp breath. The puzzle pieces were rapidly snapping into place, revealing a picture far more sinister and illegal than I could have ever imagined. Marcus and Bradley were not just related by marriage. They were co-conspirators in a massive financial fraud operation. Bradley had set up the offshore accounts to hide his stolen investor funds, and Marcus was using that same illegal pipeline to wash money for his mistress. But a burning question remained. Where did the initial influx of capital come from? Bradley's startup had no real investors because my board had already proven his pitch deck was entirely fake. Marcus had no personal wealth. So where did they get the millions of dollars needed to fund offshore accounts, buy luxury real estate in cash, and sustain their lavish lifestyles? They had to steal it from somewhere. Or more accurately, they had to steal it from someone. I opened a new search window, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I was no longer just a scorned ex-wife fighting a frivolous divorce lawsuit. I was a corporate executioner hunting down a pair of reckless thieves who had made the fatal mistake of leaving a digital paper trail in my territory. They thought they were playing a brilliant game of financial hide-and-seek. They had no idea they were hiding in a house constructed entirely of glass, and I was holding a very heavy hammer. The glow from my multiple monitors cast a cold blue light across the darkened executive office. I flexed my fingers over the keyboard, plunging deeper into the digital labyrinth Marcus and his tech bro accomplice had constructed. They were arrogant, but they were also fundamentally lazy, relying on off-the-shelf encryption and basic shell company structures that any first-year financial analyst could unravel. I was not a first-year analyst. I was the architect of a platform that handled billions in secure transactions. I traced the offshore Cayman account backward, following the digital breadcrumbs of the $2.4 million real estate purchase. I needed to find the source. I needed to see the exact moment the money was born. My proprietary software chewed through the proxy servers and bypassed the dummy directors in a matter of minutes. The screen flashed, compiling a massive data packet. A domestic routing number finally appeared. The funds had not trickled into the offshore account through small, untraceable crypto transactions, like Bradley probably claimed in his fake pitch decks. They had arrived in one massive lump sum wire transfer exactly 8 months ago. $5 million originated from a Tier 1 commercial bank right here in Atlanta. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes narrowing at the transaction ledger. A Tier 1 bank does not just wire $5 million to a completely unproven Web3 startup with 0 active users and fabricated revenue. A loan of that magnitude requires collateral. It requires underwriting corporate history and an ironclad guarantor with flawless credit and massive liquid assets. Bradley had absolutely none of those things. Marcus had even less. I tapped into my secure banking portal crossing, referencing the domestic routing number. Because my company handled escrow accounts for several major financial institutions, I had high-level clearance to request commercial loan origination documents. I submitted the query, overriding the standard processing time with my executive credentials. A progress bar crawled across the screen, 50%, 80%, 100%. The loan dossier materialized on my center monitor. I opened the file, scrolling rapidly past the standard banking terms and conditions, the amortization schedules, and the corporate disclosures. I was looking for the signature page. I needed to see exactly whose blood was signed on the dotted line to secure $5 million of capital for two men who could barely balance a household checkbook. The document snapped into focus. The primary borrower was listed as Nexus Future Tech, LLC, which was the official registered name of Bradley's garbage startup. The primary executive signature belonged to Bradley. But right beneath his name in the section strictly reserved for the corporate guarantor was a familiar string of text. M FinTech Incorporated, my company. My breath hitched in the absolute silent stillness of the room. I scrolled down exactly one more inch. There, resting on the digital page, was my signature. It was not a sloppy trace job like the fake angel investment contract Marcus had served me with earlier today. This was a flawless, digitally authenticated signature, complete with my company's official corporate seal and a time-stamped biometric verification code. I stared at the screen, feeling the ambient temperature of the office plummet. Marcus had not just cheated on me. He had not just siphoned off his mother's retirement funds. He had committed high-level corporate identity theft. I closed my eyes, piecing the timeline together with ruthless precision. 8 months ago. That was right around the time I was negotiating a massive merger with a European banking conglomerate. I had been working 18-hour days, exhausted, and constantly reviewing mountains of legal paperwork. I kept my secure corporate digital token on a biometric flash drive in my home office safe. Marcus had the code to that safe. He told me he needed it in case of emergencies. I had trusted my husband. I had trusted the man who slept next to me every single night. He had waited until I was completely consumed by my work, physically exhausted and distracted by international negotiations. He had taken my digital token, used his marital access to my home office, and stamped my corporate seal onto a $5 million commercial loan guarantee for his white brother-in-law. He weaponized my black excellence, my flawless credit rating, and my spotless corporate reputation to bail out a mediocre tech bro who could not even code his own software. The sheer terrifying magnitude of their plot unfolded in my mind like a perfectly executed blueprint. The fake civil lawsuit Marcus had filed against me this morning, demanding half of my company, was never meant to hold up in court. He knew the angel investor contract was a cheap forgery that any judge would throw out, but it was not meant to win. It was meant to be a smokescreen, a distraction. Marcus filed the frivolous lawsuit to drag me into a messy, prolonged public divorce battle. He wanted me so entirely focused on defending my company's equity from his fake claims that I would completely ignore my corporate credit monitoring. He wanted to keep me busy fighting ghosts in family court while the real bomb ticked silently in the background. Bradley's startup was dead in the water. They both knew it. The plan was for Bradley to officially declare corporate bankruptcy within the next 90 days. When the Web3 startup defaulted on the $5 million loan, the Tier 1 commercial bank would instantly trigger the guarantor clause. They would bypass Bradley entirely and come straight for the entity that backed the loan. They would come for my company. The bank would seize my corporate accounts, freeze my operational capital, and force me to liquidate my personal assets to cover the $5 million debt, plus astronomical interest and penalties. I would be financially crippled, my business reputation destroyed, and my company forced into receivership. And while I was drowning in federal court fighting a catastrophic debt I never authorized, Marcus and Bradley would be sitting on a beach somewhere perfectly insulated from the fallout. Marcus had already taken his $2.4 million cut of the loan, washed it through the Cayman Islands, and bought a luxury condo for his pregnant mistress. Bradley had undoubtedly pocketed the rest, hiding it in offshore crypto wallets disguised as corporate operational expenses. They had orchestrated the ultimate exit strategy. They were going to detonate a $5 million bomb inside my life. Stick me with the entire devastating bill and walk away completely clean with pockets full of untraceable cash. They thought they had engineered the perfect crime. They truly believed that because I was a woman, because I was a wife, I would be too blinded by the emotional devastation of infidelity and divorce to notice the massive corporate guillotine hanging right over my neck. They thought my grief would make me stupid. I opened my eyes, locking onto the fraudulent signature on the screen. There were no tears. There was no shaking. The heartbreak of a failed marriage was utterly obliterated by the cold, calculated instinct of a corporate apex predator. Marcus and Bradley did not just betray a wife. They had attempted to assassinate a CEO. I reached for my desk phone, bypassing my legal team entirely. When dealing with federal wire fraud, corporate identity theft, and offshore money laundering, you do not call a divorce attorney. You call the people who carry badges and freeze assets before the criminals even have time to pack their bags. I dialed a direct secure number I had kept on file for years. It was time to show the golden child and the white knight exactly what happens when you try to use a self-made black woman as your personal financial mule. The game was officially over, and I was going to ensure they spent the next 2 decades in a federal penitentiary, calculating exactly how badly they misjudged me. If a camera were positioned in the shadows of my office, it would capture the exact moment the grieving wife died and the corporate executioner took her first breath. It would slowly push in on my face, illuminated only by the cold blue glow of 5 computer monitors, catching the lethal stillness in my eyes. I did not shed a single tear for my broken marriage. I did not throw anything across the room. Emotional outbursts are for people who lack leverage. I had leverage in spades, and I was about to use it to surgically dismantle every single person who thought they could play me for a fool. I picked up the secure line on my desk, but I did not call my divorce attorney. Family court is a circus where bitter spouses spend hundreds of thousands of dollars fighting over couches, vacation homes, and alimony. It is a venue for domestic grievances. Marcus and his tech bro accomplice had escalated this far beyond a domestic grievance. Forging a corporate seal to secure a $5 million commercial loan and funneling the cash into offshore shell companies was not a marital dispute. It was a textbook violation of Title 18 of the United States Code. It was federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. You do not take federal crimes to a divorce judge. You take them to the people who hand out matching orange jumpsuits. My fingers flew across the keyboard, opening a heavily encrypted communication portal. Because my financial technology firm handled compliance and security for major banking institutions, I had direct lines to several federal agencies. I bypassed the regional field offices entirely and dialed the direct cellular number of Special Agent David Reynolds, a senior investigator in the FBI White-Collar Crime Division. We had worked together 2 years ago when my software flagged a massive international money laundering syndicate. He knew my voice, and more importantly, he knew I never called unless I had a bulletproof case. Maya Reynolds answered, his tone instantly shifting into professional alertness. "It is late. What do you have for me?" "I have a fully packaged $5 million bank fraud and offshore money laundering case, David," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "The victim is a Tier 1 commercial bank right here in Atlanta. The perpetrators are a fraudulent Web3 startup founder named Bradley and a domestic accomplice who happens to be my soon-to-be ex-husband, Marcus. They forged my corporate biometric signature to guarantee the loan. They have already washed $2.4 million through the Cayman Islands to purchase luxury real estate in Buckhead." I heard the rapid clicking of a keyboard on his end of the line. Federal agents love nothing more than a high-profile financial crime wrapped up with a neat little bow. "I am sending you the complete encrypted dossier right now." I continued dragging the massive data packet into the secure portal. "You will find the forged commercial loan documents, the IP address logs, proving Marcus accessed my home network while I was on a flight to London, and the exact routing numbers for the Cayman Shell accounts. I have also included the deed to the Buckhead condo he bought entirely in cash, using the laundered funds." "Got it," Reynolds said, his voice tight with focused energy. "Maya, this is an airtight paper trail. Forging a corporate guarantee on a $5 million commercial loan carries a mandatory minimum sentence. If they move the cash offshore, we are looking at decades in federal prison. I know, I replied softly. And David, do me a favor. Loop in your contacts at the Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. Because Bradley did not report that $5 million loan as corporate income, and Marcus certainly did not pay taxes on his $2.4 million real estate cash drop, Al Capone went down for tax evasion. David chuckled a dark, humorless sound. We will have their assets frozen by tomorrow morning. Where are they now? That is the best part, I said, leaning back in my leather chair. I am going to have them all in one room for you. Nice and contained. I will send you the time and location. Just have your tactical team ready in the lobby. I ended the call and placed the receiver down. The federal trap was officially armed. The FBI and the IRS were currently mobilizing to freeze every single asset attached to Marcus Bradley and Vivian. But for the trap to snap shut with maximum devastation, I needed them to walk willingly into the slaughterhouse. I needed them to feel invincible. I needed Marcus to believe his pathetic little forged angel investment lawsuit was actually working. I opened my corporate email client and drafted a new message to Marcus, his cheap contingency lawyer, and Bradley. I had to swallow my pride and craft a message that sounded entirely defeated. I had to play the role of the terrified working-class girl who had finally been crushed by the superior intellect of the elite bloodline. Marcus, the email began. I have received your civil lawsuit demanding 50% equity in my company and immediate executive control. I am completely overwhelmed. Given the severe nature of your claims and the potential damage a public trial would do to my corporate reputation, I am willing to surrender. I cannot afford to fight your legal team. I am ready to negotiate an immediate settlement to give you the equity you are demanding. Please bring your lawyer. Bring Bradley to verify the tech assets. Bring Vivian. Come to my corporate headquarters tomorrow at noon. We will handle the transfer of power in my glass boardroom. You win. I read the email twice, ensuring it dripped with enough desperation to feed his massive, raging narcissism. Marcus fundamentally believed he was smarter than me. He believed that because he came from a polished high society family, I would inevitably fold under his pressure. He was so blinded by his own arrogance that he would never stop to ask why a self-made CEO was surrendering her entire empire after a single legal threat. I clicked send. The response took exactly 4 minutes. I watched the notification pop up on my screen. It was from Marcus. The text was brief, dripping with the condescending victory of a man who thought he had just conquered the world. I told you to remember your place, Maya. We will be there at noon. Have the transfer documents ready. I locked my computer screens and stood up in the quiet darkness of my office. A cold, flawless smile stretched across my face. He took the bait. He swallowed it whole, hook, line, and sinker. Marcus Bradley and Vivian were going to march into my corporate headquarters tomorrow, dressing like conquering royalty. They were going to strut into my glass boardroom, expecting me to hand over the keys to my kingdom. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought they had finally broken the girl from the projects. They had no idea that they were walking straight into a federal ambush. They were going to walk into my building as fake billionaires, and they were going to leave in handcuffs. I turned off the office lights and walked out the door, entirely ready for tomorrow's execution. The midday sun glared off the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of my corporate boardroom, casting sharp geometric shadows across the 20-foot polished obsidian table. I sat at the head of the room, perfectly still, my hands resting lightly on the cool surface. Through the transparent walls, I had an unobstructed view of the executive floor. My staff moved quietly through the corridors, completely aware that something massive was about to shift the tectonic plates of this company. I checked the digital clock projected onto the smart glass. It was exactly noon. The private executive elevator chimed with a soft metallic ring that echoed across the open floor plan. The heavy silver doors slid apart, and my ex-husband led the procession into my sanctuary. Marcus walked with his chest puffed out, employing an arrogant, exaggerated strut that he firmly believed projected absolute authority. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that I had purchased for him in Milan 2 years ago. He moved through the ranks of my analysts and engineers, acting as if he had laid the very foundation of this building with his own 2 hands. Right beside him, marching with the fierce entitlement of a conquering queen, was his mother. Vivian had clearly spent the entire morning at a luxury salon, attempting to reconstruct the high society armor I had violently shattered the night before. She wore a sharp cream-colored dress and clutched a designer crocodile skin handbag. Her chin was tilted upward, scanning my corporate headquarters with pure aristocratic disdain. She looked every bit the triumphant matriarch coming to reclaim her stolen throne. Bradley trailed slightly behind them. The tech bro brother-in-law wore his signature unstructured blazer over a branded startup t-shirt, looking like a frantic college student who had just hacked his way into a bank vault. He was practically vibrating with nervous, greedy energy. Bringing up the rear was a sweaty, disheveled attorney, clutching a battered leather briefcase looking entirely out of place among the sleek modern architecture of my financial empire. Marcus pushed open the heavy glass doors of the boardroom without bothering to knock. He did not ask for permission to enter. He simply marched right up to the head of the table and slammed a thick stack of legal documents onto the pristine obsidian surface. The loud, aggressive smack of the paper echoed sharply in the cavernous room. He leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the table, trying to physically trap me in his shadow. "It is over," Maya Marcus declared, his voice dripping with the condescending victory of a man who thought he had just checkmated a grandmaster. "You played a good game, but the house always wins. I told you to remember your place, and now I am going to show it to you." I did not flinch. I did not blink. I simply took a slow sip of my black coffee, letting the bitter warmth ground me. Marcus tapped the thick stack of paper with his index finger. "This is an emergency court injunction. My legal counsel filed it first thing this morning based on your written admission of defeat last night. It effectively freezes all of your corporate assets and immediately suspends your executive authority pending the full transfer of my 50% equity claim. You are done making decisions here." The cheap contingency lawyer nervously adjusted his glasses, stepping forward to play his part. He refused to make direct eye contact with me. "As of this hour, ma'am, you are legally barred from accessing any corporate funds, transferring intellectual property, or executing any administrative commands. My client is now the acting interim director of this facility." I remained absolutely silent, allowing their delusion to fill the room like a noxious gas. My silence only emboldened them. Bradley decided to insert himself into the power dynamic. He paced around the perimeter of the boardroom, running his hands over my digital whiteboards and smart screens with blatant disrespect. "We are going to have to do a massive restructure," Maya Bradley said, deploying his absolute favorite meaningless Silicon Valley buzzwords. "Your infrastructure is heavily outdated." Marcus and I were talking on the drive over. "We are going to pivot this entire operation. We will synergize your escrow algorithms with my Web3 platform and integrate a crypto payment gateway. We can probably salvage the underlying code before we terminate the redundant staff outside. It is nothing personal. It is just efficient scaling." The sheer unadulterated audacity of this mediocre white man planning to terminate my elite engineering team while standing in the building I built was breathtaking. He actually believed he was going to walk away from his $5 million wire fraud by cannibalizing my legitimate corporate assets. But it was Vivian who delivered the ultimate performance of high society delusion. She stepped right up to the edge of the table, her diamond rings catching the midday sun. She looked down at me with a mixture of absolute contempt and victorious glee. "I warned you last night, little girl," Vivian hissed, her voice laced with pure venom. "I told you not to embarrass me in front of my friends. You thought because you locked my credit cards you had the upper hand. You thought you could strip me of my dignity and I would just bow down to a woman who crawled out of the projects. You are nothing but a temporary bank account we utilized to build our real legacy." Vivian turned her attention away from me and looked toward the heavy glass doors. My head of corporate security, Thomas, was standing quietly just outside the boardroom observing the interaction. Thomas was a former military police officer who had been with my company since day one. He knew exactly who I was, and he knew exactly what was about to happen. Vivian snapped her fingers at him, treating my head of security like a hired servant at a country club luncheon. "You there," she commanded, her voice ringing with aristocratic authority. "Go down to the supply room and find a cardboard box. Bring it up here immediately. You are going to help this woman pack up whatever cheap desk ornaments she has left, and then you are going to personally escort her out the back service elevator. She no longer works here. Thomas did not move a single muscle. He simply looked through the glass, making direct eye contact with me, waiting for my signal. Marcus crossed his arms over his chest, looking down at me with a satisfied smirk. Do not make this harder than it has to be, Maya. Hand over the biometric master keys to the server room. Hand over the physical banking tokens. If you walk out of here quietly without causing a scene, I will tell the judge to be lenient. I might even let you keep the car so you have something to sleep in when we foreclose on your penthouse. They had laid all their cards on the table. They had marched into my sanctuary, insulted my intelligence, threatened my staff, and ordered my own security to throw me out onto the street. They had gleefully handed me every single piece of ammunition I needed to justify their absolute destruction. I placed my coffee mug down on a small leather coaster. I uncrossed my legs and sat up perfectly straight. It was time to lock the doors and turn up the heat. The afternoon sun was entirely banished from the room as the heavy electronic privacy blinds locked into the floor with a definitive metallic thud. The sudden artificial lighting cast sharp shadows across the 20-foot obsidian table. I watched Marcus lose the last shred of his manufactured patience. My absolute stillness infuriated him. He needed me to react. He needed tears or anger to validate his hollow authority. When I gave him nothing, he reached over and snatched the thick stack of legal documents from his sweating attorney. He slammed the papers down onto the polished table right in front of my folded hands. The forceful smack vibrated through the heavy boardroom furniture. "Read it!" Marcus barked, tapping his index finger aggressively against the top page. "It is a signed order from a Fulton County judge. You are temporarily stripped of all executive voting rights, pending the resolution of my equity claim. You do not have the power to make a single decision in this building. Hand over the corporate access tokens right now, or I will have the police drag you out of here for violating a direct court order." Vivian crossed her arms over her chest, wearing a triumphant sneer. She looked at me like I was a stubborn stain on her designer shoes. Bradley pulled out his phone, acting as if he were already preparing to draft an email to my engineering team, announcing his hostile takeover. The cheap contingency lawyer simply stared at his own shoes, shifting his weight nervously from side to side. He was beginning to realize that the atmosphere in this room did not match the easy victory Marcus had promised him. I did not look at the papers. I did not even glance down at the bold legal letterhead. Instead, I slowly picked up my coffee mug again. I brought it to my lips and took a deliberate, agonizingly slow sip. I let the silence stretch, pulling the tension until it threatened to snap their fragile nerves. Marcus opened his mouth to yell again, but I held up one single manicured finger, stopping him dead in his tracks. I placed the mug back onto the leather coaster. I slid my right hand across the smooth surface of the table until my fingers brushed against the embedded biometric control panel. I pressed my thumb against the glowing scanner. A low mechanical hum instantly filled the room. The smart glass walls surrounding the boardroom frosted over in a fraction of a second, shifting from perfectly transparent to a solid, opaque white. Immediately after, the heavy electronic blinds descended from the ceiling with a quiet mechanical whir, completely sealing the glass doors. The boardroom was instantly transformed into a soundproof, inescapable vault. Marcus instinctively took a step back, his bravado fracturing as the physical environment shifted out of his control. Vivian gasped, clutching her crocodile handbag tightly against her chest. She glanced back at the frosted glass doors, suddenly realizing that her grand public spectacle had just been shut down. There was no audience left to watch her triumph. We were entirely alone. I folded my hands back together and rested them on the table. I always say never grab the shovel when your enemy is busy digging their own grave. I reached forward and picked up the court injunction using just my thumb and index finger, treating the legal document like a contaminated biohazard. I flipped to the second page, scanning the legal jargon with ruthless efficiency. I did not look at Marcus. I directed my gaze entirely at the sweaty contingency lawyer standing near the door. "Counselor," I began, my voice ringing with razor-sharp corporate authority. Did you actually draft this garbage, or did Marcus find it on a free legal template website and ask you to sign it? The lawyer swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing erratically. It is a valid temporary injunction, ma'am. The judge reviewed the angel investment contract and determined there was sufficient cause to freeze your operational control to prevent the dissipation of marital assets. I let out a harsh, cutting laugh. You walked into the headquarters of a federally regulated financial technology firm holding an injunction from a local civil family court judge. Are you completely out of your mind? Family court judges do not have the jurisdiction to freeze the operational assets of a corporation that manages billions of dollars in international escrow accounts. A local magistrate cannot legally suspend a CEO who is bound by federal banking compliance laws. This piece of paper is not worth the ink it took to print it. The lawyer wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead. He took a small step backward, bumping into the heavy privacy blinds. My client provided a signed contract proving he is a foundational shareholder, he stammered. Your client handed you a cheap forgery. I corrected my voice, dropping to a lethal calm. He traced my signature onto a retro-dated contract. And you, as an officer of the court, failed to run a basic forensic analysis before submitting a fraudulent document to a judge to extort a major corporation. You did not just file a frivolous lawsuit, counselor. You actively participated in a conspiracy to commit fraud. I have already sent a copy of your filing to the State Bar Association. You will be disbarred before the end of the month. The color completely vanished from the lawyer's face. He looked at Marcus with pure, unfiltered panic. Marcus, you told me the contract was legitimate. You told me she would just settle. Shut up! Marcus snapped at the lawyer, trying desperately to regain control of the room. He slammed his hand on the table again, but the impact lacked its previous power. Do not listen to her. She is bluffing. She is trying to intimidate us because she knows she lost. The signature is real, Maya, and you know it. You took my seed money. You are going to give me my 50%. Bradley nodded enthusiastically, stepping up beside Marcus to present a united front. You are cornered, Maya. Just surrender the administrative access tokens. We can handle the corporate transition smoothly. I already have a roadmap to integrate your servers with my Web3 infrastructure. We can turn this failing business around in 30 days. I looked at the two of them standing side by side, the delusional golden child and the fraudulent white knight. They were so utterly convinced of their own superiority that they could not see the massive guillotine blade resting directly above their necks. They thought the forged angel investment contract was their ultimate weapon. They had absolutely no idea it was just the appetizer. You really believe this piece of paper gives you power over me? I asked, tossing the injunction carelessly across the table. It slid across the smooth obsidian surface and stopped right at Vivian's fingertips. I stood up from my chair, drawing myself up to my full height. I am not bluffing, Marcus. I do not bluff. I execute. I let you walk into my building today because I wanted to look you in the eye when I tore your entire world apart. That piece of paper on the table is completely worthless, but the digital files I'm about to show you are going to put you and your tech bro best friend in a federal penitentiary for a very long time. I reached toward the center console on the table and rested my hand on the primary control dial. It was time to pull back the curtain and show the matriarch exactly what her precious boys had been doing in the dark. I twisted the sleek titanium dial on the center console. A motorized hum vibrated above us as a massive 100-inch high-definition screen descended smoothly from the ceiling panel at the far end of the boardroom. The dual 4K laser projectors mounted above my head flared to life, casting a brilliant beam of light across the darkened room. Marcus leaned forward, bracing his hands on his knees. He was bracing himself for a fight over my corporate ledgers. He fully expected to see my fintech operational accounts, my proprietary source code, or a digital copy of his forged angel investor contract. Bradley even pulled out a silver pen ready to take notes on how to dismantle my infrastructure. But when the image snapped into sharp, crystal-clear focus, it was not my corporate logo glowing on the screen. It was the bold blue emblem of a major national bank. Right below the logo, rendered in massive black text, was the name of the primary account holder, Vivian Hayes. Vivian blinked rapidly, her heavily mascaraed eyelashes fluttering in pure confusion. She squinted at the screen, adjusting her posture. That is my personal wealth management portfolio, she stated, her voice wavering between aristocratic indignation and sudden uncertainty. How did you gain access to my private financial records? Maya, this is a federal crime. I sat back in my leather chair, crossing my arms. I own a financial technology firm, Vivian. We build the security architecture that your bank uses to process high-level wealth management accounts. When I flagged an irregularity involving my own corporate seal, the compliance department gladly handed over the entire transaction history. But you should not be worried about how I got these records. You should be absolutely terrified by what is inside them. I pressed a button on my remote, advancing to the first financial slide. A massive spreadsheet filled the screen. Entire columns were highlighted in a glaring, aggressive red. Let us take a walk down memory lane, I said, keeping my voice smooth and conversational. 8 months ago, Marcus realized his marriage was failing. More importantly, he realized his unlimited access to my bank accounts was coming to an abrupt end. He needed liquid cash immediately because he had absolutely no income of his own. But I had already locked down my assets. He could not steal from me, so he turned to the only other financial well he had access to: you. Vivian shook her head, her diamond earrings catching the light from the projector. Marcus manages my portfolio. He has full power of attorney to ensure my assets grow. He is protecting my retirement. I clicked to the next slide. A series of wire transfer receipts appeared, each one stamped with Marcus's digital signature. He is not protecting your retirement, Vivian. He annihilated it, I corrected. Look at the screen. Between October and December of last year, Marcus executed 12 separate wire transfers from your primary retirement account. He drained $4.2 million in liquid cash. He did not reinvest it in bonds or mutual funds. He sent it directly to a Cayman Islands holding company. Vivian turned slowly toward Marcus. Her face was losing color by the second. Marcus, what is she talking about? Where is my money? Marcus swallowed so hard I could see the muscles in his neck strain. Mother, it is a tactical reallocation. I moved the funds offshore to avoid a massive capital gains tax penalty. It is perfectly safe. It is completely gone, I countered, cutting through his pathetic lie like a scythe. I clicked to the third slide. This time, the screen displayed the corporate registry of the offshore account. The parent company listed was Nexus Future Tech, LLC, Bradley's company. I pointed my remote directly at Bradley, who was currently pressing his back against the glass wall as if trying to merge with the architecture. Marcus took your life savings, Vivian, and handed them to your white son-in-law so he could play tech mogul. Bradley took your $4.2 million and blew it on a fabricated Web3 platform. He used your retirement to pay for his private jet rentals, his catered networking events, and his inflated CEO salary. Your money is currently sitting in the pockets of Silicon Valley event planners and fake data farms in Eastern Europe. Chloe let out a sharp gasp, grabbing her husband's arm. Bradley, tell me this is not true. Tell me you did not take my mother's money. Bradley refused to look at his wife. He kept his eyes glued to the floor, his face flushed a deep, guilty crimson. He had nothing to say because the numbers on the screen were absolute and unforgiving. But that is just the liquid cash, I continued, refusing to let them breathe. Marcus realized $4 million was not enough to save Bradley's sinking ship and fund his own extravagant lifestyle, so he needed to leverage your physical assets. I pressed the button again. The screen shifted, displaying a heavily notarized real estate document. It was a commercial property deed. Specifically, it was the deed to Vivian's prized ancestral estate in the historic district of Atlanta. The house she bragged about at every single country club event. The house she claimed had been in her family for 3 generations. Vivian let out a strangled, horrific sound. She recognized the document immediately. In January, Marcus took out a massive second mortgage against your estate, I stated, delivering the facts with brutal surgical precision. He leveraged your home for a $5 million commercial loan, but he knew your credit could not secure that kind of capital on its own. So he forged my corporate biometric signature to guarantee the debt. He put your house on the chopping block and used my company as the safety net. Vivian was visibly shaking now. She gripped the edge of the obsidian table, her perfectly manicured nails scraping against the polished stone. You told me those were standard tax forms, Marcus. She whispered, her voice cracking, breaking under the weight of the betrayal. You told me to sign them to protect the estate from the IRS. You mortgaged my home. Mother, I had a plan, Marcus pleaded, stepping toward her, hands raised in a gesture of surrender. The startup was going to scale. We were going to double the investment and pay off the mortgage before the bank ever noticed. It was a bridge loan. It was a heist, I corrected sharply. And here is the best part, Vivian. Marcus did not give all of that loan money to Bradley. He kept a very generous cut for himself. I clicked to the final slide. The screen split into two distinct images. On the left was a closing document for a $2.4 million luxury penthouse in Buckhead, paid entirely in cash. On the right was a high-resolution medical scan, a black-and-white ultrasound of a 6-month-old fetus. The patient name printed clearly at the top of the medical file was Jasmine Carter. The room descended into a silence so absolute it felt like a vacuum had sucked all the oxygen out of the air. While you were busy hosting charity galas and calling me a working-class nobody, Vivian, your golden child was busy using your stolen home equity to buy a cash penthouse for a 24-year-old cigar lounge receptionist, I said, letting the truth detonate inside the soundproof room. He could not steal from me because I am smarter than him, so he robbed you blind to fund his pregnant mistress. Vivian stared at the ultrasound on the massive screen. Her chest heaved with rapid, shallow breaths. The grand illusion of her flawless elite bloodline had not just been shattered. It had been publicly, meticulously butchered by the very son she had worshipped. The man she believed was a titan of industry was nothing but a common thief who had sold his own mother's roof to buy a love nest for a waitress. The silence in the boardroom was no longer just heavy, it was radioactive. Vivian stood absolutely frozen, staring at the massive projection screen. Her eyes darted frantically between the black and white ultrasound image and the cash settlement statement for the luxury penthouse. The rigid, aristocratic posture she had maintained for decades visibly collapsed. Her shoulders slumped and the expensive cream-colored dress suddenly looked like a tragic costume on a broken elderly woman. She turned her head toward Marcus. The movement was slow and jerky, like a malfunctioning animatronic figure. Mother, please. Marcus started taking a hesitant step forward. He raised his hands, palms facing outward in a desperate gesture of surrender. I was going to pay it back. The startup was just experiencing a temporary bottleneck. I needed to secure a secondary asset portfolio to diversify our holdings. The girl is just a mistake. I am handling it. I promise you, I am handling it. A mistake, Vivian repeated. The words scraped against her throat, coming out as a raspy, venomous hiss. A secondary asset portfolio. You mortgaged the house your grandfather built. You mortgaged the ancestral estate that gives this family its entire identity, so you could buy a $2 million playground for a 24-year-old cigar lounge receptionist. You stole my retirement, Marcus. You stole my home. Before Marcus could formulate another pathetic corporate buzzword excuse, the room erupted into absolute anarchy. Chloe, who had been completely paralyzed by the collateral damage of her husband's financial treason, suddenly snapped. She turned on Bradley, slamming her designer handbag directly into his chest. You knew about this, she shrieked, her voice echoing violently off the frosted glass walls. You helped him steal from my mother to fund your fake tech company. You told me we were going to be billionaires, Bradley. You told me you were pitching to venture capitalists. Bradley stumbled backward, putting his hands up to shield his face from his wife's manicured claws. Chloe, stop it, he whined, his unearned tech bro confidence completely evaporating into pure cowardice. Marcus is the one who forged the documents. He is the one who set up the Cayman accounts. I just needed operational capital. He is the one who decided to leverage the house. Do not you dare put this on me, you useless parasite, Marcus roared, pointing a shaking finger at his brother-in-law. You burned through $4 million in 6 months. You rented private jets to fly to crypto conventions while I was covering your tracks. You are the one who could not write a single line of functioning software code to save your life. The cheap contingency lawyer had seen entirely enough. He realized with absolute clarity that he was standing in a room with three individuals who were practically begging for federal indictments. He quietly grabbed his battered leather briefcase and scrambled toward the heavy glass doors, pressing himself against the frosted panels, like a trapped rat desperate for an exit. Vivian did not care about Bradley. She did not care about the lawyer. Her entire universe had just been obliterated by the one person she had worshipped her entire life. Her golden child. The son she had elevated above everyone else. The son she had protected and enabled while relentlessly criticizing me. She marched straight up to Marcus. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure primal rage. "You worthless thief," she screamed at the absolute top of her lungs. Vivian raised her right hand and delivered a devastating open-palmed slap directly across Marcus's face. The physical impact sounded like a whip cracking in the enclosed space. Marcus stumbled sideways, crashing hard into one of the expensive leather boardroom chairs. He brought a hand up to his rapidly reddening cheek, looking at his mother with absolute shock. Vivian did not stop. She lunged forward, grabbing him by the lapels of his custom Italian suit, the very suit I had purchased for him. She shook him violently, her diamond rings catching the stark light of the projector. "You ruined us!" Vivian shrieked, tears of mascara streaming down her face, ruining her perfect high society makeup. "You threw our legacy in the garbage. You are going to go to prison and you are going to leave me on the street. I hate you. I absolutely hate you." I sat at the head of the obsidian table watching the empire tear itself to bloody shreds. I did not raise my voice. I did not intervene. I simply watched them execute each other with the very weapons they had tried to use against me. They had marched into my sanctuary expecting a coronation. Instead, they were delivering a spectacular tragedy. I reached forward and pressed the intercom button on my central console. The green light blinked twice. "Thomas," I said, my voice slicing cleanly through the chaotic screaming match. "You can come in now. Bring the team." The heavy electronic locks on the boardroom doors disengaged with a sharp click. The frosted glass cleared instantly, returning to perfect transparency. Thomas stepped into the room, flanked by four massive security officers in crisp, dark suits. They moved with military precision. "Clear the room," I ordered, casually picking up my coffee mug again. "Take their fake injunction and throw it in the lobby recycling bin. Escort all four of these individuals out of my building immediately. If they resist, or if they attempt to cause a scene on the executive floor, call the Atlanta Police Department and have them arrested for criminal trespassing." Marcus scrambled to his feet, straightening his ruined suit jacket. His arrogant facade was completely dead. His eyes were wide with pure, unadulterated terror. "Maya, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "We can fix this. I can sign the company back over to you. Just do not call the authorities. Please." I looked him dead in the eye, offering him a smile that contained 0 degrees of warmth. "You wanted to run a company, Marcus," I said softly. "Go run a cell block." Thomas stepped forward, grabbing Marcus firmly by the bicep. The other security officers moved in, flanking Vivian, Bradley, and the weeping Chloe. The contingency lawyer was already sprinting down the hallway toward the service elevator. "Get your hands off me," Vivian snapped, attempting one final pathetic display of aristocratic authority as a security guard guided her toward the door. "I am Vivian Hayes. I demand respect." "You are a squatter, Vivian," I called out, stopping her in her tracks. "Enjoy the fresh air on the sidewalk, because the temperature is dropping rapidly and you are entirely out of funds." I watched through the glass walls as my security team marched the entire broken family down the corridor. Employees stopped and stared, watching the disgraced golden child and the fallen matriarch being paraded toward the exits like common criminals. I turned back to the massive projector screen. The image of the Buckhead condo and the 6-month ultrasound still glowed brightly. The trap had been perfectly executed, but the absolute sweetest part of this vengeance was still waiting for them at the ancestral estate. I picked up my phone and dialed my private driver. It was time to go watch the grand finale. The heavy doors of my corporate headquarters faded into the distance as my private driver navigated the sleek black Maybach through the chaotic Atlanta afternoon traffic. I sat in the plush leatherback seat, with a glass of sparkling water resting in my hand. The quiet hum of the engine was a stark contrast to the absolute bloodbath I had just orchestrated in my boardroom. I opened my encrypted tablet, tracing the digital shockwaves currently rippling through the city. Marcus and his mother had been unceremoniously dumped onto the sidewalk by my security team. Their phones were likely hemorrhaging desperate text messages. But I was not focused on Marcus anymore. A desperate man with a frozen bank account and a pregnant mistress was a predictable variable. He would panic, he would run, and he would ultimately fail. My focus was entirely locked on Vivian. When a narcissistic matriarch realizes her entire high society empire is built on stolen funds, she does not sit down and accept defeat. She scrambles for the ultimate safety net. She reaches for the crown jewel of her carefully curated illusion. Miles away in the historic district of the city, Vivian was pacing the original hardwood floors of her prized ancestral estate. The sprawling $5 million mansion was a physical monument to her ego. It boasted towering Corinthian columns, imported Italian marble fireplaces, and a sweeping grand staircase where she had hosted decades of exclusive charity luncheons. She had used the sheer magnitude of this property to remind me of my place every single time I crossed the threshold. She treated the house like a royal palace that validated her inherent superiority over my working-class roots. Right now, that palace was the only thing standing between her and absolute ruin. Vivian was moving with a frantic, manic energy that completely shattered her polished, aristocratic facade. She was tearing through her master bedroom, throwing custom silk blouses and designer dresses into a set of vintage Louis Vuitton luggage. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely operate the gold zippers. The sting of slapping her golden child across the face still lingered on her palm, but the maternal rage was rapidly being swallowed whole by pure, unadulterated terror. She knew exactly what I was capable of. She knew that the federal government does not send polite warning letters when investigating $5 million commercial bank fraud and offshore money laundering. They send armored vehicles and armed agents at the crack of dawn. She needed to get Marcus out of the crosshairs before a federal indictment destroyed the family name forever. She needed retainers for the most ruthless criminal defense attorneys in the state. And more importantly, she needed to flee the city before her country club committee officially blacklisted her from polite society. To do all of that, she needed an immediate massive injection of liquid cash, and her only remaining asset was the very ground she was standing on. Vivian snatched her backup cell phone from the velvet ottoman and frantically dialed the number of Atlanta's most elite luxury real estate broker. She paced the length of her Persian rug, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The phone rang 3 times before a smooth professional voice answered the line. "Evelyn, listen to me very carefully," Vivian demanded, skipping every basic rule of high society etiquette. Her voice was sharp, bordering on hysterical. "I need to liquidate the estate immediately. I need a cash buyer today." There was a stunned pause on the other end of the line. The broker was clearly taken aback by the sheer desperation radiating from a woman who usually spent 30 minutes discussing the weather before mentioning business. "Vivian, what are you talking about?" Evelyn asked, her tone cautious. "Your home is a historic landmark. A property of that magnitude requires a targeted marketing campaign. We have to stage the interior, schedule private showings for international buyers, and carefully negotiate the asking price. You cannot just sell a $5 million estate in a single afternoon." "I do not care about the asking price," Vivian screamed, losing her grip on reality entirely. She gripped the edge of her antique vanity, her knuckles turning stark white. "Do you hear me, Evelyn? I do not care about staging. I do not care about the market value. Find me a developer, an international investor, a corporate buyer. I do not care who it is. Tell them I will take 3.5 million. Tell them I will take 3 million flat if they can wire the funds into a secure offshore account by tomorrow morning." "Vivian, you are completely bypassing standard protocol." Evelyn stammered, clearly alarmed by the unprecedented massive price cut and the erratic behavior. "I cannot legally expedite a multi-million-dollar real estate transaction without running a comprehensive title search and clearing the deed through your primary mortgage lender. The bank has to authorize the sale. Then call the bank, Vivian commanded, her voice cracking under the suffocating weight of her impending destruction. Call the Wealth Management Division right now. Tell them I am authorizing a fire sale to clear the primary mortgage, and I am taking the remaining equity in cash. Just get it done, Evelyn. My family is facing an absolute emergency, and I need that money transferred immediately. Vivian hung up the phone without waiting for a response and tossed the device onto the bed. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, trying to force back the tears of terror and humiliation. She believed she had just initiated the ultimate salvation plan. She genuinely thought that sacrificing the ancestral estate would provide her with a $3 million golden parachute. She thought she could buy her way out of federal prison, buy her son the best defense lawyers in the country, and disappear into the sunset with whatever dignity she had left. She believed the massive stone walls of her mansion were her absolute impenetrable shield. Outside the wrought iron gates of the estate, my black Maybach rolled to a smooth, silent stop. I sat in the back seat looking through the tinted glass at the towering facade of Vivian's prized mansion. The beautifully manicured lawns and the grand circular driveway looked exactly the same as they did the first time Marcus brought me here to meet his mother. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, a cold, flawless smile spreading across my lips. I knew exactly what phone call Vivian had just made. I knew exactly how desperately she was trying to liquidate the property to save her own skin. She was inside packing her bags, convinced she still held the winning hand. She was completely, utterly unaware that her desperate phone call to the broker had just triggered the final devastating phase of my execution plan. Inside the cavernous master suite, Vivian snatched her backup phone from the mattress and frantically dialed the VIP executive tier of her primary bank. She bypassed the standard automated menus, punching in her private wealth management access code with trembling fingers. She needed the bank to clear the title for her broker immediately. The line clicked and a senior account director named Harrison answered the call. Harrison, Vivian barked, ignoring every standard pleasantry. I am authorizing an immediate emergency liquidation of the primary estate. I am executing a cash fire sale through my broker. Clear the mortgage deeds right now and prepare to wire my remaining property equity into my offshore routing account. The sound of rapid typing echoed through the receiver. Mrs. Hayes, please hold for one moment while I pull up your property ledger, Harrison said, his tone impeccably polite. Vivian paced furiously across her Persian rug. She glared at her packed Louis Vuitton luggage, convinced she was still 5 steps ahead of the incoming disaster. She thought she was a master tactician executing a flawless escape. Harrison returned to the line, but the warm customer service tone had completely vanished. Ma'am, there must be some confusion. You do not have the authorization to liquidate this property. Furthermore, there is zero available equity for you to claim. Vivian stopped dead in her tracks. Do not speak to me about confusion, she snapped, her aristocratic entitlement flaring up one last time. My family has banked with your institution for decades. This estate is appraised at over $5 million. The original mortgage is barely a fraction of that amount. Clear the deed, Harrison. Mrs. Hayes Harrison corrected her with brutal clinical efficiency. You took out a catastrophic second mortgage using this property as collateral. You completely defaulted on that secondary loan exactly 4 years ago. The original underwriters initiated immediate foreclosure proceedings. Foreclosure. Vivian gasped, the air suddenly freezing in her lungs. I was never evicted. I have been living here uninterrupted. Marcus handled those notices. He told me the debt was restructured. It was not restructured, Harrison stated firmly. The distressed debt was purchased in its entirety during a closed-door corporate auction. A private wealth management firm bought your defaulted mortgage, paid off the original lenders, and assumed total ownership of the deed. They have been quietly paying your property taxes and maintaining the foundational insurance for the last 48 months. You are not the homeowner, Mrs. Hayes. Legally speaking, you have been a non-paying tenant living on their property by their grace alone. The blood completely drained from Vivian's face. The heavy diamond earrings suddenly felt like lead weights pulling her down. She gripped the edge of her mahogany dresser, her legs shaking so violently she could barely keep herself upright. Who? Vivian whispered, her voice cracking into a pathetic, terrified rasp. Who bought the debt? Give me the name of the holding company right now. I hear the rustle of paperwork over the line. The debt was purchased and is currently held by a corporate entity registered as M Fintech LLC. The phone slipped from Vivian's trembling fingers. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp crack bouncing under the edge of the bed. M Fintech. Maya's financial technology. The terrifying absolute magnitude of the trap finally crushed her. Maya did not just discover Marcus's fraud today. Maya had known they were bleeding her dry 4 years ago. Instead of warning Vivian or fighting in family court, Maya had quietly swooped in, bought the defaulted debt for pennies on the dollar, and silently purchased the ancestral estate right out from under her. Maya had owned the very roof over Vivian's head for 4 entire years. Every single time Vivian hosted a high society gala, every time she looked down her nose at Maya's working-class roots, she had been throwing a party inside Maya's house. Vivian collapsed onto her knees on the expensive rug. The crushing weight of absolute ruin pressed the last breath from her lungs. She had no house, she had no money, she had no escape route. She was nothing but a squatter in the kingdom of the woman she had tried to destroy. I watched the grand facade of the mansion through the tinted glass of my Maybach. The heavy wrought iron gates stood tall, projecting an illusion of safety that was about to be violently dismantled. I opened the door and stepped out into the humid evening air. The camera perspective would frame this perfectly, as an over-the-shoulder shot tracking my gaze as I looked up at the towering columns of my newly acquired property. Almost on cue, a deafening chorus of sirens pierced the quiet neighborhood. A fleet of matte black tactical vehicles and marked police cruisers swarmed the quiet aristocratic street. They boxed in the estate, mounting the pristine curbs and blocking every possible exit. Red and blue emergency lights violently painted the manicured hedges and the stone exterior of the house in harsh, flashing colors. The quiet sanctuary of Atlanta's old money elite was instantly transformed into a federal crime scene. Dozens of agents wearing dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters of the FBI and the United States Marshals Service stamped across their backs poured out of the vehicles. They did not ring the doorbell or wait for the butler. They breached the front gates and swarmed the grand entryway with absolute military precision. I leaned against the hood of my SUV, crossing my arms as I watched the front doors swing open. Marcus was the first to be dragged out. His hands were yanked behind his back and secured with heavy steel handcuffs. The bespoke charcoal suit I had purchased for him was now rumpled and dirtied. His face was twisted in an expression of pure, unfiltered terror. He struggled against the grip of the federal marshals, looking frantically around the driveway for an escape route that did not exist. Bradley was hauled out right behind him. The arrogant tech bro who had offered me a secretarial job just hours ago was now openly weeping. His unstructured blazer was slipping off his shoulder as he desperately tried to explain himself to the arresting agents. He was babbling incoherently, pointing his cuffed hands at Marcus, and attempting to shift the entire blame for the offshore accounts. "You have the right to remain silent," a senior FBI agent shouted over the chaos, reading them their rights on the front steps. "You are being placed under federal arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, and aggravated corporate identity theft." Chloe burst out of the front doors, screaming hysterically. She chased after the agents, her designer heels snapping against the pavement. She lunged toward Bradley, but a marshal firmly blocked her path. Chloe collapsed onto the manicured front lawn, sobbing uncontrollably. She buried her face in her hands, her perfectly styled hair falling in messy clumps around her shoulders. The fantasy of her billionaire tech mogul husband and her untouchable family name had just been handcuffed and read its Miranda rights right in front of the entire neighborhood. Marcus finally locked eyes with me. He saw me standing calmly by my car, bathed in the flashing police lights. His mouth opened in a silent scream of realization. He knew I had orchestrated every single second of this raid. I simply offered him a slow, satisfied nod as the agent shoved his head down and forced him into the back of a waiting transport vehicle. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had crushed them completely. As the heavy doors of the transport vehicle slammed shut, sealing Marcus inside, my gaze shifted back to the grand entrance of the estate. Vivian stumbled through the massive front doors. She looked entirely unrecognizable. The meticulously groomed matriarch who had commanded country club galas just hours ago was completely gone. Her expensive silk dress was wrinkled, and her perfectly styled hair hung in disheveled strands around her tear-stained face. She had watched from the grand staircase as federal agents hauled her golden child away in handcuffs, and now she was stepping out into the harsh, flashing lights of reality. Vivian saw me standing calmly beside my Maybach. Her eyes darted from the retreating police cruisers to the federal agents securing the perimeter of the property. The absolute totality of her ruin finally shattered her aristocratic pride. She staggered across the manicured lawn, her designer heels sinking into the soft grass until she reached the edge of the driveway. Her knees buckled. The woman who had spent 7 years looking down at me from a manufactured pedestal collapsed onto the concrete right at my feet. "Maya, please!" Vivian sobbed, her voice cracking into a raw, desperate wail. "Please stop this. You have made your point. You took the money. You took my son. Please do not take my home. We are family, Maya. You cannot just throw family out onto the street." I looked down at the weeping woman trembling on the pavement. I felt absolutely no pity. I reached into my tailored blazer and withdrew a crisp folded document along with a heavy set of brass keys. I held them out, letting the red and blue emergency lights reflect off the metal. "Family," I asked, my voice echoing with a cold, lethal stillness. "You taught me that family was just a business transaction dressed up in pretty words. You used my bank accounts to fund your delusions, and you used my name to shield your crimes. Well, today I am officially declaring this business bankrupt." I opened my hand. The eviction notice and the house keys hit the concrete right next to Vivian's trembling fingers with a sharp, definitive clatter. "You have exactly 2 hours to vacate my property," I commanded, turning my back on her before she could utter another pathetic plea. The camera would slowly pull back, capturing the perfect cinematic climax. I walked away in slow motion, my tailored power suit cutting a sharp, commanding silhouette against the flashing police lights and the smoking ruins of my in-laws' fake empire. I did not look back at the sobbing matriarch or the weeping sister-in-law. I looked directly into the camera lens, allowing a dark, victorious smirk to spread across my face. "They say the best revenge is living well," I said, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "They are wrong. The best revenge is living exceptionally well right on top of the ashes of the people who tried to burn you alive." Fade to black.